for the Defense POW. Okay, I'll start again. I'm Dave Kalis, the comptroller for the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. A great opportunity to talk, especially on Memorial Day weekend, about our mission and what we do for the Department of Defense and for the nation at large. So this is a great opportunity, and I'm very, very happy to share some time with you and talk about our mission and our agency. So I got it right. It's Pat, and Pat, you're with one of the veterans organizations in the area.
Yes, I belong to the American Legion. I'm an Army veteran. Did OEF in 2010-11 with the Iowa National Guard. And I did my best to promote the event through our social media and some other things. So I feel a little let down that we didn't get more people here. So my apologies on that.
No, that's quite all right. Hopefully you can beat the drum a little more and share the video. And I will make myself available to come back at another time to do it again if we want to do that. So that's easy enough. So let's go ahead and start. I hope you can see my screen and can see part of me at least. So you should be seeing some of our crew. I'm not exactly sure where they are on the left-hand side of the slide. I know they're in Southeast Asia, but I just don't know which country in Southeast Asia. And then on the right-hand side is a funeral at Arlington National Cemetery. Go to the next slide. So we're a defense agency within the Department of Defense. For most everybody that's not familiar with how the department's set up, we're broken up into the individual services, and then some of the larger offices within the Secretary of Defense's office. We have an undersecretary for policy, an undersecretary for personnel and readiness, an undersecretary for installations, and various undersecretaries. We fall under the undersecretary for policy as a defense agency. So we're a separate organization. We have a separate director, but we do report to an undersecretary who obviously reports to the Secretary of Defense. And our mission is very simply stated. It's in the law in Title 10, which is defense. And it's to provide the fullest possible accounting for our missing personnel and provide information to families and the nation. We have two primary missions. One is the accounting mission, which is to go out, do the research, do the investigations and recoveries, and bring service members back to the lab to be identified and accounted for. The term accounted for is not necessarily easily understood by many people, but units, and Pat, you obviously know this, many military units have lists or rosters, and when they go into the field or underway on ship, that sailing list accounts for all the people that are on board at that time. What we're doing is we're going back and making sure that that person was part of that unit at that time in the conflict. And we work on a very high bar for values. The entire agency, which is a little over 700 people. We have roughly 300 active duty military from the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, and about 300 civilians. We had some contractors and some volunteers and some students, and we have a relatively robust force of about 700 or so, split across the United States and overseas. Our headquarters is in Washington, D.C., or actually in Arlington, Virginia. We're very close to the Pentagon. We have a laboratory in Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska. Our major laboratory and primary base for all of our missions is in Honolulu, Hawaii. We have detachments in Germany, Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand. And we have a presence in a couple of other Asia Pacific nations, Philippines, Papua New Guinea, sometimes in Cambodia as well. So we're very spread across the world. And we really strive towards our values, which is compassion, especially with the families, our integrity, and trying to make sure our quality, the quality of our work, and integral to our processes. Teamwork can't be done by any one group within our agency. It's got to be done in a team effort. Respect for others and respect for our nation, and innovation, because this is not an easy mission, and it really requires a lot of innovation over time, use of DNA and other scientific methods to identify remains and account for missing personnel over the past conflicts. We don't go further back than World War II. For the longest period of time, the law was limited to Korea to present day conflicts. And in 2010, the World War II was added to our roster, which significantly increased our workload. So right now we're searching for about 81,000 missing and unaccounted for personnel from World War II to present day. That's a tall order, especially with the amount of resources we have available and the complexity of the cases to work and try and locate personnel. Okay, I'll jump to the next slide. All right, I'm going to pitch off to our video. Let me see if I can make this work. I'm going to share a different screen. Okay. And this screen is from our website, dpaa.mil, part of the Department of Defense. And we have a number of stories and videos and information about losses and accounted for and the missing, and some of the families we've been working with and meet with periodically, and some of the funerals up to present day. I heard you briefly mention a couple of Oklahoma, USS Oklahoma losses that were brought back to Iowa. And that's been a very, very successful project for us, very complex. And it's taken quite some time to identify and account for a number of personnel off the USS Oklahoma. Very rewarding. Okay, let me start this video, and the voice should be familiar. This video will run for about 8 to 10 minutes if everything goes well.
We write no last chapters. We close no books. We put away no final memories. An end to America's involvement in Vietnam cannot come before we have achieved the fullest possible accounting of those missing in action.
Why keep searching? The answer is simple. You never leave a fallen American behind. The mission of the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, or DPAA, is to provide the fullest possible accounting for our missing personnel to their families and their nation. Strategically located in Arlington, Virginia, with major facilities at Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hickam, Hawaii, and Offutt Air Force Base, Nebraska, the more than 600-person newly established defense agency is jointly manned by soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and Department of Defense civilians with specialized skills. Researching, recovering, identifying, and ultimately returning an individual to their family begins with analysis and investigation. The DPAA experts begin the search by studying all known information regarding the circumstances of each loss. Historians and analysts gather information from U.S. veterans, foreign witnesses, archival records, and other sources. They then create a case file for each unaccounted for American. This file may include historical records, official correspondence, maps, photographs, daily activity logs, and medical and personnel records of the missing person. These files are continually updated until an identification is made.
Once the research has been done here, and we get the command's approval, we send out small teams, could be up to 2 people, it could be a 10-person team, conducting interviews at a villager's house, at a district office, or a combination of going to the site first and then conducting the interviews on site.
Once all available information is analyzed, a decision can be made to disinter individuals buried as unknown or conduct field investigations. During a typical investigation mission, personnel interview potential witnesses, conduct on-site reconnaissance, and survey terrain for safety and logistical concerns. Teams also try to generate new leads that may result in future recoveries. The main goal of the investigation is to obtain enough information to correlate or connect a particular site with one or more missing Americans. If enough on-site evidence is found, the site will be recommended for recovery and excavation. Recovery sites range in size from a few square meters, such as in individual burials, to areas larger than football fields for aircraft crashes. DPAA may hire as many as 100 local workers to help with the excavation process.
This job has so many benefits. For me personally, it's an opportunity to serve the country, but also our fighting forces and kind of contribute to that as well. Professionally, it's just an incredible challenge to get to work in all the countries where we work, to travel to these amazing sites, to work with the local villagers and local officials, and just have the opportunity to give somebody some answers after decades of waiting to know what happened to their loved one, and maybe just wrestling with the grief that lack of information and lack of answers brings. We have the chance to resolve that for them, and that's just an incredible opportunity.
Investigative and recovery missions in search of missing Americans take DPAA personnel to distant, remote, and often dangerous locations all over the globe. Rice paddies in Southeast Asia, areas on the Korean Peninsula, 16,000-foot mountaintops in the Himalayas, and underwater sites off the coast of Papua New Guinea. And we still continue to search the battlefields of World War II throughout Europe. After a successful recovery, all evidence is then transported to the DPAA laboratories. Once they've arrived in the lab, the painstaking process of identification begins. This is the final step of the mission, leading to the return of an individual. In many of the cases, an important step in the identification process is DNA analysis, which is accomplished by cutting a bone sample that is sent to the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory. One of the challenges DPAA faces today is the lack of reference samples from family members of those still unaccounted for. Any person who is a relative of an unaccounted for American is encouraged to contact their service casualty office to ensure there is a DNA reference sample on file for that service member. DPAA makes an identification when all available evidence remains. Artifacts and historical documents point to the same person. The ID process can take anywhere from a few months to several years to complete. Any unresolved cases are kept open with the hope that new evidence will be found, or new technologies will be developed to make a future identification possible. Once an American has been identified, their remains are returned to their family through their respective service casualty office. They are returned home with full military honors and given the respect they earned through their service and sacrifice for their country.
Oh, as a family member, this agency to me is doing phenomenal work, and in a very personal way, because when somebody loses somebody like my father, and you really don't know what the story is for 70 years, and then you find an agency that knows about him and keeps his his memory alive, keeps the mission alive to try to find him. It's very meaningful in a very personal way, because it means you're not just doing this yourself alone. You have a whole body of people who are concerned about finding your dad and bringing him home.
That says something about how we honor our dead, particularly those who have served this nation. I'm very grateful to all of the DPAA and the related agencies, military in general, as they've pursued this in our government, and for our citizens, because they think it's an important enough mission to continue. We value life, and very few nations, I don't think any other nation to this degree does this.
Which makes me proud to be an American.
I just wanted to yell to openly to everybody out there, he's home, he's home. I couldn't believe it. And when I went up and touched his name, I thought, you're home, you're home. It's unbelievable. I'm glad I live in the United States of America and that we have this attitude. Leave no man behind. We're so fortunate. I want you to know, and I know from my own experience, that if something's happened to you, we will be looking for you.
The men and women of the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency are united in their effort to recover and return as many of our missing personnel as possible. One more patriot returned, one more family that now has answers. One more step in fulfilling our nation's promise.
I was gonna say, it was kind of concert. Recognized his vote.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. And Pat, you hit it right on the head. I was going to ask if the voice was familiar, and it is Kevin Costner, and it's really coincidental. I didn't realize this. I'm familiar with Iowa. I grew up outside of Chicago many years ago. We used to go to Iowa every once in a while because my mom's side of the family had family that were in the Dubuque and area along the Mississippi. But I didn't realize until just a little while ago, and I was looking on the map just a little bit more because I couldn't remember where Dyersville is on the map. And I didn't realize that the Field of Dreams movie was filmed just outside your town. So it's kind of a coincidence, and a very fitting coincidence as well.
Sure, we're sitting, I don't know, 3 or 4 miles as the crow flies from that field. So right now, so.
I'll continue on with the story. And that's a great video, and it covers many of the conflicts. It covers World War II, covers Korea, covers Vietnam. There are some losses after Vietnam to present day as well, and we're still in active pursuit of some. It's like I said, it's 81,000 missing and unaccounted for, and realistically, because so many World War II losses were what we consider deep sea losses, ships that sank or submarines that sank in the ocean. And many of those losses are unrecoverable because of the depth. At least they're unrecoverable for right now. The Navy considers most ships that go down during wartime to be the final resting place for those sailors. But there's still active cases for some that may have a chance to produce remains or some type of evidence to account for additional personnel. And as you see here on this slide, we work with a lot of other agencies within the Department of Defense. We really heavily rely on the service casualty officers within the Army, the Navy, Marines, and Air Force to work with the families, since they're responsible for delivering the news that a loved one has been identified, recovered and identified. They're responsible also for obtaining the DNA samples or family reference samples that were mentioned in the video. And we rely heavily on that. There's a slide later on here that talks about some other lines of evidence that could be used to help identify and account for somebody, but it's very, very difficult. DNA is the best evidence available, but it takes time. As was mentioned, a recovery today could take a couple, 3-4 years before we actually make the identification and accounted for. There's just that much that has to go on to make sure that we've got the right person, we've notified the right people, and it's really who we thought it was. We work obviously with the Armed Forces DNA Lab, the services, the Defense Intelligence Agency. This mission began years ago with losses from Vietnam, with field activities from the Defense Intelligence Agency in Vietnam to help shape the cases and provide good information that we can do the additional research to lead to an investigation mission in the nation. So some of the numbers and really the worldwide approach that we have to take, and why this is a generational, or really in many respects, a multi-generational scope. I mentioned the numbers are very, very daunting, and why about 36 to 38,000 we believe are recoverable because of the deep sea losses, especially from World War II. We have been working with partner nations and continue to add partner nations through a program called Partnerships and Innovation, where we use NGOs, non-governmental organizations, universities, colleges that have a really deep background in history and research. And we use those partners to help get to expand our mission and get to some of the more challenging countries. It's a very high visibility mission, and a lot of emotion and a lot of passion when we meet with veterans groups. We have government meetings with families in various cities throughout the country. We tried to do them in person, but because of COVID over the past couple of years, most of our meetings have been virtual in this type of a format, or on Teams. I'm sorry, not Teams. On Facebook, we do a Facebook Live presentation sometimes. And it's very rewarding to be with the people and to explain the case and what's going on with the loss of their loved one. So accounting basics, and this probably is a good opportunity to talk about why is the comptroller of the agency making a pitch or giving a presentation on the mission of the agency. And honestly, from my view, I have a very good understanding of how the organization works. I have to document it. We're also obviously doing the financial aspects of receive an appropriation, disperse the money to our within our agency to help with the research, or actually push people out to go on a field mission, to do the outreach and communications mission. I get to see it all in some ways. I have a very unique perch on the ship and making sure everything is running correctly, because we also have the accounting and audit requirements as well. But my accounting for finances is very similar in some ways to the accounting for personnel. We have records, we have processes and accountability to ensure that those records are as accurate as possible. So when we start a research case, it's very in-depth. Specifically, the research cases for disinterments, where we're going into a cemetery and we're removing a casket from the cemetery. There's a lengthy process and a lot of evidence that has to be prepared. And we have an oversight group that goes back up to a Secretary of Defense office for approval before we can disinter that body and start the scientific process to identify an account, where we go all over. The heaviest activity right now is in Southeast Asia. The Vietnam War is our #1 highest priority mission wise right now. It's challenging as well because the missions are very, very expensive, very time consuming. The soil is relatively acidic, so things deteriorate very rapidly. But we also have missions throughout Europe to support a lot of the World War II efforts. You've probably heard of the unilateral return of remains from Korea a couple of years ago. That case was called the K-55 for 55 transfer cases from the DPRK, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And we've been steadily working through the remains to identify and account for personnel that were lost in the Korea conflict, Korean War. So we're all over the world. We really are. And it's a very challenging mission. Some of our staff, especially the active duty soldiers and Marines and some of our Navy personnel and airmen, they have got to be in absolute perfect physical shape to go through some of the mountains and higher elevation areas in places like Papua New Guinea, because it's just that remote and very, very challenging conditions. So I spoke a little bit earlier about lines of evidence, and obviously the having DNA evidence is really some of the best evidence we could possibly get, but it's not necessarily just the DNA. Forensic odontology, dental records, the historical backgrounds. We have archaeologists, forensic anthropologists, the material evidence, the wreckage from an aircraft loss can help identify the tail number of the aircraft, which will lead to the crew list, which will lead to who could possibly have been on that aircraft, and even through a process of elimination determine whether or not we have somebody, and could go even further with another line of evidence to help identify and account for that person. Very scientific, very process oriented, which again, that's kind of ties into what I do professionally as a comptroller. We have very, very dedicated processes. Our methodology and the way we conduct our business is very heavily driven on solid process, repeatable processes, and proven processes at that. So some things that have happened just recently, and I heard you mention this earlier about the USS Oklahoma. That was a very, very successful disinterment program, and very complex. It's very true that Pearl Harbor was an extraordinarily devastating incident, and the chaos and the number of ships that sank in the harbor or burned or capsized made the whole effort just that much more complex. But with a lot of analysis and a lot of work with the Navy, we've been able to identify a significant number of the disinterred from the cemetery in Hawaii called the Punch Bowl. I think that number now is higher. I think it's actually 363. So we'll have to update our slide, but that was significant development and probably one of our biggest successes for a very large scale disinterment project. I mentioned the K-55. This was challenging. We've had a couple of opportunities where North Korea has provided unilaterally provided remains to the United States. And in each instance, the number of boxes and the number of identified and accounted for are not necessarily the same number. That's called commingled remains. Sometimes it's just the nature of the accident or the incident. An air crash, especially a high-speed air crash, can have a lot of bodies in one very, very close location. And that makes the project very, very difficult because you're separating pieces of bone or fragments to make sure that you've got as many pieces of osseous material to make an identification and ensure that you don't have somebody else in with that set of remains. We've had a lot of increased interest from Congress, especially over the past couple of years. We've provided many, many briefs to both the House and the Senate, and it's paid off. Both the House and the Senate, for about 4 years in a row, provided additional funding to our mission through congressional program increases, as small as $5 million and as high as $25 million. That's a significant plus for our agency. We're a very small agency in a very, very big department. Our annual budget runs between $130 and $150 million a year, and that's just a drop in the bucket when you look at a Department of Defense that routinely is appropriated well in excess of $700 billion a year. There's a lot of zeros behind that first decimal point before you get to the amount of money that's spent on us. We constantly work with Congress, constantly work with the department to try and gain additional resources because the missions are very challenging. They are becoming much more complex, much more costly, and recently with inflation, traveling anywhere is becoming a very, very big burden for us. We've had teams out into as many as 27 countries in FY21, 22 and to present day, a few less because of COVID restrictions and trying to get into a number of countries where they're having problems as well. And unfortunately, we're not going to go and risk our staff to a condition where they may develop COVID in a remote area, and it may be difficult to get them out of that area. So last year, FY21 was a little under our goal. Our goal is about 200 identifications annually. Last year at 142 was below our goal, but we did have some good recoveries of remains, or what we call accessions into the laboratory for future identification and accounted for work. And as I mentioned, we have partners, not only NGO, non-governmental organizations, but universities and research institutions to help us in our field efforts. That's really the bulk of my presentation. I'm more than glad to talk for a couple more minutes if you have questions, but I encourage you, please stay connected to, you've shown great interest in attending tonight, but staying connected and visiting our webpage will bring you up to date on the most recent funerals and successful accounting and identification efforts we've had to date. And I look forward to entertaining a couple of questions if you have any.
Sure. You had mentioned that World War II was added to the mission. What year was that?
I believe that was 2010. The FY20 2010 National Defense Authorization Act.
Okay,
So
because that explains, you know, it seems like, especially the success you've had with the Oklahoma disinterments or what have you from Punchbowl there that, because I just didn't seem to remember as many, and it has been, I don't want to say common by any means, but we've had a lot of days where we put the flag at half-staff, the governor orders, and a Iowa sailor, and several in recent memory too of soldiers from Korea, which amazes me because I was stationed in Korea, and I remember how much the Hermit Kingdom held back. And I don't know what negotiation it took to get your K-55. When I was there, I did have the opportunity to go to Panmunjom a few times, where there was a exchange of remains. And it usually had to do with one of their operatives washing up on the shore somewhere that had drowned trying to infiltrate the South. And there was an exchange, and we would be there to document it. Had the fortune when I was over in Korea, I was a still photographic specialist at that time. So we would document the United Nations Command, Military Assistance Command efforts there and exchanging. And I know so many Korean remains were so far north when the Chinese came across and trapped, entire battalions and stuff. But it's amazing to see that's coming forth now. I'm absolutely amazed by your mission. Maybe the controller is the only one that can tell the story with all you have going on. So.
I have a unique perspective because I help and I get a lot of help from the rest of the agency to prepare what we call budget justification material, the things that we have to deliver to Congress to request funds during the president's budget submission. So we have to provide a lot of details, a lot of performance, key performance indicators, talk about our staff, the number of military personnel, the number of civilians, how much we pay them. So I get a very, very unique perspective on all the things that are done. It's good to work with these folks, and they're very, very willing to try and get us something else that will help us justify some additional funds. The resources are tight. There's no two ways about it. For Korea, a couple of years ago, and this is kind of interesting, that I was working on the Joint Staff in the Joint Staff Comptroller's office. I was a budget analyst at the time, and the chairman received a request from what's now Indo-PACOM, at that time it was PACOM, for funds to help pay for the DNA accessions from the Marines that were lost in Korea. And we have been very, very successful in identifying Korean losses. And it's that type of funding really goes a long way. The money didn't come to DPAA or our predecessor organization at the time, the JPAC, Joint Personnel Accounting Activity, Accounting Command, I'm sorry. That was a Navy-run command. But it went to the Marine Corps. Just happened to have the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs as a Marine, and he thought, hey, we got additional funds, we can do this. And it's been very, very beneficial. So any returns from Korea, and we do have missions in Korea very, very sparingly. Most of it's in the far north aspects of South Korea, where we may have an opportunity, and close to the DMZ. So it's a very, very delicate mission. During the Trump administration, it just happened to work out. The relationship that he built with Kim at the time, that was a big piece of the trust between the two of them. And it was very, very fruitful for us and resulted in a good number of identifications.
Yeah, we'll take it as a win for sure. The other question, I guess, is you had mentioned volunteers. Do you get, and yet this mission is so difficult physically. Are you getting retired active duty that are in their 40s, or do you got guys like me that are, bumping 60 and over that are volunteering in some, because it seems like you you could use a lot of people, a lot of expertise in places, but how does that work, I guess?
We do. We get a number of volunteers. It's not a very large group. Where we get the biggest bang for our buck is working with the services and the combatant commands. And we have a program called STIAs, or short-term individual augmentee. So an airman at UCOM in Germany, he's got some downtime.
Active duty volunteers that are TDY or what have you.
Correct. But we do have a few volunteers. A lot of volunteers are doing historical research for us, or helping out in that area. Very, very few missions rely on volunteers to go out into the field. Now, our partnerships, where we're working with universities, we've got a number of students that will go out into the field and help build their expertise and knowledge to help with the anthropology degree, or forensic anthropology degree, or archaeology degree, something in that area. So those have been very, very productive, and we're getting more traction with what's called R1 institutions, or larger research universities and colleges, and we get more participation that way, and it's helping out significantly.
Sure. I guess the other question is, what do you see? What's next? I know it's a continuing mission, but what do you think is going to be the next highlight in the next year, next 5 years? I mean, the World War II mission alone is almost mind-boggling, but are you seeing some innovation coming? What's around the corner, I guess?
The numbers are definitely daunting. And when you express that to inside the department and to Congress, it's kind of numbing in some respects. And knowing that we're funded to reach a goal of 200 accounted for annually, it doesn't take much to do the math to figure out that this mission is going to take years and years and years and years.
Sure.
DNA and our lab has been working with they've been working on some other isotope material to help refine the osseous material to determine where that bone came from. That process helps kind of say, hey, this person, separate a person that was from, say, Africa versus a person that was from Iowa, just on the isotope analysis that's performed. It's very lengthy, it's very expensive, and it takes a lot of time. We just don't have a lot of time in some respects.
That brings up my last question, I promise. Brings up a question, because I saw them working with material evidence. I do recall a program I saw, I think it was called the Last Bomber Mission or something. It was on PBS, B-24 off Sicily.
Right.
They eventually found the wedding ring of the pilot. Majority of the crew, I think, had bailed out and had survived. You can't use material evidence alone. You've got to have that DNA confirmation, right? I'm
not 100% positive of that. We DNA alone can help make the identification and the accounted for, but material evidence with other lines of evidence can help get us to where we have a high likelihood or some near certainty that we can account for the person, identify and account for the person.
Yeah, and I just can't recall in that case because the wedding ring and there were, other personal effects, and the fact that the crew had said, in this case, an airplane, the captain had gone down with the ship, allowing them to bail out, stuff like that. So in this case, the material evidence was probably enough. I just didn't know if you had to verify.
Yeah, I want to say that was the last B-24 was a PBS documentary.
Yeah. And then they found a B-25 in the search for this one too, that you expanded your mission, finding one mission.
Right. And that's where the research really comes into play. So if the records are there, they know who the crew was that was on the aircraft, and they can start weeding out or singling out based on what they're able to locate. It's very challenging and it's very tedious at times. But it takes a lot of time to do it, to make sure that we're accurate. And that's the key. We have to be accurate.
Well, thank you. I appreciate, sorry we didn't have a bigger room for you.
No, that's okay. I hope the recording, folks will have an opportunity over the next 30 days or so and longer. If Shirley, if you need to or would like to, I'm sure we could go longer. I have no objection to it. I'm sure my public affairs staff won't have any objection to it at all. But I really do appreciate your time. Great questions. Thank you for serving. I'm a retiree as well. I started my career in the Navy in '83 and was commissioned in the Coast Guard in 1990. Retired 15 years ago, and I've been a defense civilian ever since. So long time with the Department of Defense and the military, but it's
Well, 83 was a pivotal year. I had a long break in service. 83 was the year I went into October, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, in basic training. So
I was
had
out,
a good couple of us that year.
I was out in San Diego, Recruit Training Center, San Diego.
Outstanding. Well, thanks for your service too.
Thank you very much. Glad to do it. Very fun. Well, thank you. Shirley, that concludes my presentation. I really appreciate the opportunity to get with you and meet you and Pat, and thank you. This was a lot of fun and something I haven't done in quite a while. It's been years since I've gotten to play in the public affairs role. In fact, I was a public affairs officer at a Coast Guard unit for a couple of years as a collateral duty. So this is a good thing to do again, to add to my resume again.
Get you pumped up.
There you go.
I really appreciate your.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night and a very enjoyable and safe Memorial Day.
We'll see us sometime.
Definitely. Most definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.